Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Graham, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this month's MillerKnoll Design Perspective. Today, we'll be exploring neuroaesthetics. In today's conversation, Lena Brockmann Juhl of Muuto, who is the Chief Marketing Officer, will share insights on designing intentional spaces for well-being. Lena will share the 5 guiding principles of neuroaesthetics, the scientific discipline that explores the way art, design, and architecture activate our senses. We look forward to the conversation today. We welcome your dialogue and your questions. If you do have those, please pop them into the chat. We'll do our best to monitor them along the way, and we will possibly pop those in throughout the dialogue. We have also reserved some time at the end of today's discussion to make sure that we have time to discuss and explore a little bit further. So please do that. At this time, I would like to turn the conversation over to Lena, who's joining us from lovely Copenhagen. Lena, would you like to take us away?
Of course, I will. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. And thank you for taking the time to be here today with us. I'm gonna share my screen, and I just want to make sure that you can hear and see the screen. I can't see you guys. Jennifer, can you just give me a nod? Yes, it's working. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining. As Jennifer said, I'm Lena, and I'm responsible for brand and marketing here at Muuto. I've been with Muuto for 11 years, and today it's gonna be about something that I'm super passionate about, which is neuroaesthetics. But before we get going, I'm just curious to know if any of you know the Muuto brand. This won't be a brand presentation, but I just wanted to give a short intro to the brand. Muuto was founded back in 2006 by 2 guys that had an ambition to create a new chapter in the history of Scandinavian design. So we are standing on the shoulders of the Scandinavian design values of honest design and craftsmanship, but wanted to bring it into a more contemporary and forward-looking year, so to speak. And why is it that we want to talk about neuroaesthetics? I just thought that we would start actually with a small disclaimer, because I'm talking to a whole group of experts, and I'm actually not an interior designer. I'm not an architect. And why am I then on this call? Well, the whole idea is actually that I'll be sharing to you guys about how Muuto is working with this concept, and try to give some examples of how this framework is shaping how we are working, both in terms of product design, but also in creating our spaces, our showrooms around the world. So before we get going, what is neuroaesthetics? It sounds super scientific. It is as well. I actually like to describe it the way that we all know this feeling of entering a room where you just feel really at ease, where you really like to be. I think we can all think about a space like that. Neuroaesthetics is actually trying to understand why that is, and what it is that makes us thrive in certain areas, and certain spaces. So it's the science that looks to how we are responding to certain aesthetic experiences, and that can be everything from art and music to architecture to a certain space, a certain room. And what neuroaesthetic is exploring is then how your body is reacting to that space. So in a way, you can think about it as your senses that are scanning a room. So if you think about going into a certain space, and you normally think about it, you know, you're looking at it with your eyes, and then you think about, do I like this color or not? But neuroaesthetics is actually kind of your unconscious senses that are activated and that are responding to that specific place. What I really like when I think about, or what triggered me when I started understanding a bit more about this science, is that you can start thinking about neuroaesthetics as there's never a neutral space. So that means that whenever you are entering a space, you will always respond to it in one way or another. So you cannot think about creating a space that is neutral. We will always react to the environment that we are in. And to explain it a little bit more, I like to give some examples from my own life. I just said that it's a very broad field. I had two experiences in my life that can explain it. One is I have two teenage sons, and I brought them into a quite famous church here in Copenhagen that you see on the left, the image. It's called Grundtvigs Kirken. And, you know, bringing teenage boys into a nice architecture experience is not easy. But what happened was that they were super noisy and active. And then, you know, we entered this room and suddenly they became really quiet and, you know, started looking up. And, you know, what they experienced was, or, you know, they were completely taken away by this beautiful building. And that's neuroaesthetics. Another example that I like to give is the picture on the right. Is my close to our summer house. It's nature. And when I'm in that place, that's where I'm from originally, I immediately get very grounded and very relaxed and, you know, feel very connected to that place. And that's also an example of neuroaesthetics. So it's in the broadest term, it can also be like the examples on the right, you know, how you can be certain emotions can come to you when you hear certain music, getting lost in an art piece, etc. The way that I'll be talking about it in this presentation is going to be focused on interior design. And you can say, why is Muuto talking about this? Well, I think probably similar to many of you, neuroaesthetics and neuroscience is explaining to me, is providing a language to a lot of the things that we've been doing intuitively all along. So I think it's always been, you know, at the heart of us as a brand and as a company to create full settings and really being careful about creating a certain atmosphere, more so than pushing a single product. So when we first heard about this term in 2019, when we did a collaboration with Google and Johns Hopkins Institute in Milan, in a way I felt that it provided a language for what we knew intuitively all along. And since then, you know, we've been curious and wanting to learn more. And yeah, I think what is interesting here is then trying to bring in science and academia to explain something creative and an aesthetics. So we started out by working with Susan and Ivy for the project in Milan, and that journey began back in 2019. And since then, we've added on more experts around the world. So Dr. Chamberlain from London and Professor Turing in Munich are some of the people that are already part of academia in this field. What we see is that it's really an emerging field that over the last 5-10 years has been emerging. And I think part of the explanation is that now we can start measuring without wearing too many crazy wearables, actually physiologically how our body is responding to certain spaces. So I think a lot of really interesting research is happening in this field at the moment, and it's not just from neuroscientists. It's actually bridging, you know, psychologists, sociologists, architecture, etc. So it's really super exciting. But now into how Muuto is working with this. So for us to be a little bit more concrete, we developed this framework based on science together with Susan, where we're actually trying to narrow it down and focus on these 5 principles, and using the 5 principles to be more intentional about the spaces that we create. And that is form, tactility, light, nature, and color. And I'll just go through them briefly. So when you talk about form and you talk about neuroscience, what we can see from research is that we naturally are drawn to certain shapes. So the human species is naturally drawn to more rounded and softer shapes as opposed to sharper angles that we kind of think of as something more dangerous. So including more embracing curve is really helping create a more inviting and a more friendly space. So that's of course something to consider in terms of the products, but of course also the architecture of the room. And that is something that is universal. So across all the different countries in the world, each person will naturally be drawn to these softer shapes. When it comes to experiencing a room, we often think of it, as I said before, that we look at a room or we judge a room with our eyes, but the haptic sense, which is the sense of touch, of tactility, is actually much stronger. So if you think about our hands, we have millions of synapses in our hands. And what happens is that when we are kind of scanning a room or a space, we are also doing so with our haptic sense. So being very mindful about including different textures, different patterns in the spaces that we are creating is creating a much more engaging and much more interesting space that you feel like engaging with your body. So we can all think about these spaces where there's a use of certain material that you just feel like touching with your hand, and that's this tactile experience or this haptic sense that makes you read the room in a completely different way as opposed to just plain surfaces. Then we talk about light, and humans, as humans, we are creatures of light, and we can all, now I live in a Nordic country where in a couple of months, it will be dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. During the summer, it's light all year round, but comes winter time, it's something that really affects the mood of a lot of people here, because we are simply not exposed to daylight. So we know how important light is for how we are feeling and our well-being. We can also think about being jet lagged when we are traveling. It's something that's really having a profound effect on how we are feeling. And then how can we then use that in our interior? Of course, the building itself has a lot to say, but this dynamic aspect of light is super important in how you experience a space. If we think back on our office space, I can see that I'm reacting very strongly to light, so I often prefer to sit, maybe not the most economically comfortable space, but the space where there is the best light, the most natural light. And when we know that, of course, we also know that during the day, the light will travel throughout the room and it will engage with all the different textures and all the different material in the room. So this kind of dynamic feature of light is something that really impacts how we are feeling in a space. Then we talk about nature, and when you think about Muuto being a design company or furniture company, why is nature important to us? Nature, I think, when you talk neuroscience, is kind of the most aesthetic of places. If we look at humankind, we spend up till now 99.2% of our time in nature. So it's only the last 0.8% that we are actually living in the built environment. And that means that our body in a way has been wired to feeling more grounded and more at ease in nature. And a lot of the features that we are reacting to are actually something that we recognize from nature. You can measure on your body. If you spend 20 minutes in nature, in the woods, you can actively measure that your cortisol levels are lowered. So this physiological response that we talked about before is something very concrete that you can see when you are in nature. So what that means for us as a company, I think several things. So one thing is, of course, if you cannot be outdoors always, or unfortunately we cannot, how can you bring as much of the outdoors indoor? I think one thing is, of course, prioritizing having an outdoor area. If we know that you can lower your cortisol level, lower your stress levels by spending 20 minutes outside, having a really nice lunch break outside can make a huge difference in the stress level of employees. But what you are also seeing in neuroscience is that your body and mind is actually quite clever in the sense that it will recognize a lot of the cues from nature when you're bringing it inside. So the use of wood, for example, your body will kind of recognize it not as being in nature, but as close to nature as possible. So bringing in natural materials and elements from nature can actually help you get some of the benefits from being outside. We spend in the developed world, we spend between 90 and 95% of our time indoors. So I think being mindful of how you can incorporate elements from nature inside is really important. Of course, wooden products is one thing, but bringing in plants and vases with flowers, etc., will also have an effect on how we are perceiving certain spaces. And then the last one is color. So whereas the 4 previous principles were all universal, meaning that it's something very deep in us that is causing this reaction. When it comes to color, it's a much more cultural thing. So we know that we are reacting very strongly to color when we are perceiving a space, but we also know that it's something that we've been primed from our upbringing and from culture. So different colors can have different meanings depending on where we are from. Colors is also very contextual. So when we talk about color, which is something super important and very important in the DNA of Muuto, color is not always about being colorful. So we often talk about color as being contextual. And if you visit one of our showrooms or the headquarters in Copenhagen, you'll see that our backdrop is not. We actually change everything into this very light, warm gray because we have a lot of oak products. And if you put oak next to white, it will be a much harder experience compared to oak next to a light gray. So that's some of the example of how you are experiencing the color in a contextual way and can really impact how you are perceiving the space. So this was super high level, an introduction to the framework that we are working with in Muuto, both in terms of how we are developing our products, but also how we are doing our showrooms and our stores across the world. I thought it would be also really interesting to try and go a little bit more in depth with some of the projects that we've been working on. And I mentioned previously that we started talking about the term neuroaesthetics in 2019, and that was when we did an exhibition at Salone. I don't know if any of you had the chance to experience the exhibition back then, but it was a really exciting project because we got to do 3 very different rooms, and every visitor were then equipped with kind of a smartwatch that could then measure how the body was reacting to the 3 very different rooms. So what we wanted to create in the different rooms was 3 very different atmospheres, and then see when the visitors were experiencing the room, how were they reacting in each room, and we kind of measure where they felt the most at ease. And the interesting thing is that, we might think that we like a certain aesthetic. Maybe we've seen something on Pinterest or Instagram, and this is, what we should like. But then your body is actually telling you something else. And I think that relationship is super interesting to try and be more mindful about. And this is, of course, what happened during this exhibition. The 3 rooms everything was kind of designed around these very different themes. So meaning the lighting, the architecture, the colorways, the choice of products, but even the sound and also the smell were different in the 3 rooms. So one was very kind of natural and earthy and very warm, like the use of like wool and a lot of wood. The second one being like very energetic and vibrant. We had like a very citrusy smell and very strong colors. And then the last one being more elegant and refined with leather materials. So kind of, within the setting, of course, of a fair, trying to build quite different experiences. And each visitor spent then 5 minutes in each room. And afterwards, they got a read on in which room they felt the most at ease. I'll just show you a small video that explains the concept a little bit more. And hopefully this should be working.
Google created an exhibition that is showing.
Okay. Let's see if it's
Google created an exhibition that is showing design's impact on our biology.
The way that I explain neuroaesthetics is really simple. It's basically how your brain changes on the arts. When you have a heightened aesthetic experience, like a piece of music, a sunrise, things that really elevate your everyday experiences, they change you. They change your biology, they change your mood, they change your emotion.
I called Suchi Reddy and I said, taking the neuroaesthetic principles, could you create 3 different rooms that would evoke different responses?
The goal is to see how people resonate with space and to really find out whether is what their body is actually resonating with.
We respond to the aesthetics of our environments, whether we realize it or not. The band can demonstrate with data from the sensors that actually is happening. Heart activity, respiratory activity, skin temperature, skin conductance. We figure out from the data which room is the one that feels the calmest or the most at ease for people.
Where does your physiology feel most peaceful? I think it's what people are searching for. The space between the notes, the place where they can come and just be.
The interiors where we work and where we live have a deep impact on our well-being. We've always known it and believed in it, but we haven't been able to quantify it and prove it. You enter a space and it's like, I like it, but why?
This is about data used as a mirror back to yourself. Data is just a bunch of numbers, and we wanted to make it artistic in its expression.
It can be really hard to put an aesthetic experience into words. But suddenly, by combining science and technology, we get a new language.
We've selected room 2 as the room that you were the most calm in.
Maybe a watercolor can tell more than 1,000 words.
Technology has the ability to help you know yourself better. The problems of the future are only going to become more complicated. Solutions have to happen in this collaboration of technology, the arts, and science.
Okay, so yeah, so this was kind of the start of our work with neuroaesthetic, and since then, we continue to do more practical cases because I think this is really where we start merging the science with real life, and where we can start learning more about the work that is so important that each of us are doing to trying to create better interior spaces. One of the projects is actually together also with Susan McSalmon at the Johns Hopkins University Center. So what happened during COVID, I think similar to a lot of hospitals around the world, a lot of the staff was experiencing a burnout and was very stressed. And what she wanted to do was try to find out if we could, with what we know from neuroaesthetic, we could improve the stress level and the general well-being of the staff. So what we did, what you're seeing here is really bad renders, but I think it's better than nothing. So so these staff room before, they looked like, I think probably most staff room looked like no one had really paid a lot of attention to the space. But what we did then was try to redesign the space with the neuroaesthetic principles in mind. So trying to bring in elements of nature, try to bring in different spaces where you could sit, actually some areas where you can sit and doodle, because you know that doing small art can help you feel better as well, bringing in lots of wooden products. And then we are measuring this for several months, and we're expecting to get the results in about 3 months. So we're super excited to see if we can, just with quite simple, not bigger budget necessarily, but with simple principles, try to change how people are experiencing their break. Another case that is here in Copenhagen. It's also in the healthcare segment, so it's a hospice. Diakonissestiftelsen, it's called. They have a very visionary director who's in a way been practicing neuroaesthetics without knowing it. The space is a really beautiful architect piece. But what you can see is that they have really prioritized the outdoor area. So there's a huge outdoor area where they bringing elements of like water, lots of greenery, lots of different small nooks where you can sit outside. And in the inside as well, you see all these rounded shapes everywhere. She insisted on bringing in natural wood in the furniture. It's a really beautiful place. You see the piano over there. They bring in music. They have invested in a lot of art pieces. So it's a quite special place. What we're doing now is that we have interviewed her to understand, her vision behind the space. But then we're actually we're interviewing the professor, Dr. Chamberlain, to try and explain from a neuroaesthetic principle, why is it that this is working? So I think it's interesting to design spaces, from the beginning, proactively understand using neuroaesthetic principles, but sometimes it can also help us actually in retrospective to go back and explain why is it that certain spaces are actually working really well. And that interview will come out soon. Yeah, so as I said, as a kind of rounding up, as I said before, we spend close to 90% of our time indoors. So I think if we think about how we are optimizing our life in a lot of different areas, what do we eat, with our smartwatches, like how much do we work out and all these different things. I think considering the fact that we're spending so much time indoor, it makes our job so important. And I think this research can help in a way provide a language and explain why it's important and also why it is that it should be prioritized. I think when we are working on different projects, we always have time as a limitation, and there's budget constraints, and it's sometimes difficult to argue for that particular material or color or whatever it is, but here I think it's providing another dimension, I think, to that part of the project. So thinking about ergonomics and sustainability and quality and delivery time, all that is of course super important, but I think considering how we can be a little bit more intentional about our spaces and how we can leverage this emerging field in academia is super interesting, I think. And of course, I'm also very curious to hear your thoughts on this. Now I've shared some highlights on how Muuto is working with this topic, but I'm of course also curious to know how you are applying it in your field. I think this was actually the roundup of the presentation. Now I can't see your faces. It's always a bit difficult for me to present when I don't see people, but I will practice. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat.
Thank you, Lena. There were a few. First, I think, could you maybe share with our audience where they might be able to find the information if they want to read more about it? We also had our question about where to find the video.
Yes. So then I'll actually just go back. I think there's a QR code, maybe. That's for the newsletter, but if you go to muuto.com, we will have an area around intentional spaces, and that's the place where we're sharing all these different case studies. So there's going to be different interviews with experts, but there will also be the video available. And this is also where we'll publish all the new case studies that we are working on at the moment.
Thank you. There was also a question, does the research include the effects of temperature and sound on the way people interact with spaces and feel within them?
Yes. Yeah. So as I started by saying, neuroaesthetics is a really broad area. I mean, a lot of the research is, about how you can use music to improve dementia, or how you can improve Alzheimer's by dancing. And I mean, it's a really broad field. And I think the way that we're looking at it is, of course, a bit with the Muuto lens on it. So, but scent and sound and is very much so a part of it. I could see someone is writing about the book, so you can see here that I talked a lot about Susan McSalmon, but also about Ivy Ross from Google. So they wrote a book called Your Brain on Art, which also talks about this project that we did together in Milan, but it talks about the term in a little bit broader sense. It's a really great. I think it's also in how do you call audiobook. It's really a nice introduction to the subject.
There's also a question here. How would you describe the emotional tone typically conveyed by these aesthetic responses?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Sure. How would you describe the emotional tone typically conveyed by these aesthetic responses?
So what the reactions will be?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that's.
Yeah. So I think I think you can divide it into the physiological responses. So for example, being in nature, and you can actually see on your hormone level, the cortisol, your stress hormone, you can actually measure that it's lowered after 20 minutes. It can be your heart rate. So what we did in the Google project in Milan, we measured heart rate. We measured skin conductance, so how much you are sweating. So there's all these different biometric that can give an indication on where you are thriving. But then there's also the qualitative part. So in the study that we're doing at Johns Hopkins, we are measuring the physiological, but we're also asking them qualitative questions. So where are you feeling at ease, or do you feel? And I mean, when you are talking about neuroaesthetic, you can also want to achieve different things. So we talk about being at ease, or we talk about well-being, but you can also think that you would like to achieve, being more energetic or having a more, upbeat sense. So I think the science is explaining that you are responding, to the space, and you cannot not respond, right? So it's not like you can design a space and you think, people are not gonna feel something or react to this space. So there will be a reaction, and it will not be the same for you and me, because we each kind of have different we are primed in different ways. So there's universal things such as, positive responses to rounded shapes and, the tactile experience, like how you can create more engaging spaces with tactility. So of course there's these universal guides, but the thing is, I think the science is also explaining to us you cannot really make a manual and say, if you do this, then you're home free. But what it can help us understand is that we will react to it, and by being more curious and trying to understand, and I think also being better at going back when we have designed spaces and, this was the intention that we had with this space, did it actually work? And then, with the science, maybe being a little bit better at having cues at what is actually working and what is not.
There's so many things I feel now that are written about grounding and kind of starting your day that way with nature, and how it helps you, reset your circadian rhythm, helps you with sleep. You talked about cortisol balance and this idea of nature and things within neuroaesthetics. So I think, there's much to be said about that. There is a question here: can neuroaesthetics really help in designing for a neurodiverse audience?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's also a good question. And I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm sure that Susan can answer that much better than I can. But what I've been very curious about this particular topic as well, and what I've read so far is that certain environments, we might think that if we're designing for neurodiversity, for autism, for example, that we would, think that we should limit the amount of stimuli that you get in the environment. But that's not necessarily always the case. So I think, there might be certain things that you can generalize on, but I think that the point is also that you need to, to test it, to see it. So I don't think, I don't have an answer to what the right setting is to that.
Okay, we have another one here. How do cultural or contextual background of people influence neuroaesthetic reactions?
Yeah, we had a really, I think we had, so I think there are things that are universal, but there are certainly also a lot of things I think that's back to your roots and where you grew up and how you have, what you have been exposed to. We had I had a really interesting talk with a journalist that experienced the Salone exhibition, and she went through and she came out and she's like, this is not working. It told me that I was most at ease in this room and I really didn't like that place. And, then Susan started asking her, about the place and where she grew up. And then it turned out that a lot of the material used on the wall was very similar to her upbringing in Latin America. And then, she figured out she had this whole explanation then from her upbringing, like why that could be that she resonated so well with that particular room. So yeah, so I think definitely there's some cultural elements to it, but I think there's also things where, no matter where we're from, the fact that, that we have been living in nature for so long, a lot of, when you think about the shapes, when you think about the tactility, all these elements, you can recognize and see these elements in nature as well. So they will be universal.
Great. Are there any other questions this afternoon? Okay,
Jennifer,
here's one.
it looks like there are two over in the Q&A as well, if you hadn't seen those yet.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I see one just popped here. You mentioned the variations in cultural perceptions of color. Has Muuto considered performing similar studies measuring reactions to design spaces outside of Europe and North America to better understand the way culture impacts perception of other neuroaesthetic principles?
Yeah, so I think, Muuto is sold in 50 countries. So it's super relevant that we understand, how how colors are perceived in the different countries. We opened a store in Tokyo recently, and there we worked really closely with our partner in Tokyo. And we actually, even though we have a pretty, we have a quite wide collection of Muuto atmospheres, so to say. We actually chose to do something particular for the store in Tokyo. Similar, maybe I could say in Shanghai. So yeah, I think definitely.
Were there any studies done on brainwave frequencies in relation to neuroaesthetics?
I'm sure. So I think we should get the neuroscientist expert on, and I'm sure that Susan can explain much better the science behind it. But I know that the brainwaves, I mean, there are done brainwave studies. It's not something that we have used in Muuto, but I talked actually to someone in the UK, where in the product development they were using that. And then from a scientific point of view, there's the whole, like, how are you then being, if you are ending up wearing a wearable that is kind of interfering too much with your experience, then it's like, how valid is it and all that. But that's where I think the smartwatches become really handy, because this is not something that's gonna affect, your experience in a space. You can kind of act natural, and it will still give you some cues.
Sure. Let me check the Q&A here and see. Oh, I'm curious to know which room overall felt most calming from the research at Salon, or was it pretty evenly distributed?
Yes. What do you guys think?
Any thoughts on what you saw?
Yeah, we thought that there would be a winner, but it was actually more or less a third. Yeah, so I agree with Sydney. I thought that it would be the earthy room, but it ended up being almost a third. And I mean, we couldn't keep the data, so this is only based on kind of exit polls, so to speak, because for GDPR reasons we couldn't save the data and publish anything around it. But it was actually quite evenly distributed, and I think that's also really interesting, because it means, like, if you think of it from a brand perspective, or even from a company DNA, it's like we cannot design then out of just having one aesthetic. This is how Muuto should look like. It's only this colorway, because it would actually mean that 2/3 will not thrive in that environment. So yeah, so I think that's also what neuroaesthetic can teach us, that it's important to have a variety of aesthetics or of atmospheres in the spaces that we are creating, because each of us will kind of respond differently to different environments. And I mean, even if you think about it throughout a day, you might need different things. So if you think about how you are working throughout the day, sometimes you are maybe looking to be more social. Maybe sometimes I always seek the daylight, but at nighttime it's the opposite. So I think this notion that that you only want to design with a certain aesthetic, I think is actually what we learn the most from this. That it's really important that we, of course, it should feel like Muuto, but it's also really important that we try to show different atmospheres, because that's how we're going to create the most spaces where people are thriving.
Great. Well, we have an ask here. Do you think that Charles Eames thought about this when he designed the lounge chair?
Yes, I think a lot of architects, a lot of creatives, musicians, painters, designers, I think intuitively they know this. But we haven't, we might not have been able to explain why. And I think that's the whole neuroscience part that can help us explain intuitively what we know is right in the creative, as a creative. So I think intuition plays actually the creative intuition, I think, plays a big role in this.
And we have a comment here. India has a very strong sense of color in day-to-day life and also how they are used in a space. People perceive different colors for different contexts. Would be interesting to conduct a similar exercise here. So
Yeah.
a little comment there. And also there's another comment on halfway through your brain on art, and it speaks about frequencies that the book listening to 40 watts valuable for some individuals.
Yeah.
40 hours.
Yeah.
There were comments, people in the audience liked the earthy, just from getting the visual.
Yeah.
I guess we'd all have to have our fans on to know if we really were most calm the earthy. And lots of thanks here to you, Lena.
Thank you. I hope I get to meet some of you in real life. I think I always prefer to do this presentation in an actual Muuto showroom, but that's a little bit tricky when I'm on the other side of the world. But hopefully, I invite all of you, if you're in Copenhagen, to stop by the Muuto showroom, or maybe see some of you around the world sometime.
Just trying to see if I caught everything here. I think I did, Lena.
Great.
If there are additional questions, please continue to pop them in the chat. And if there's things that come in, after the close of this, we will be sure to respond to you as soon as we can. And if there's things that pop after today, please reach out to your local Muuto or MillerKnoll representative, and we'd be happy to get those answers back to you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Enjoy your day, everyone, and please join us next month for Design Perspectives. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Lena.
Well, thank you.
Wonderful job.